Hello and welcome to yet another virtual event with Tattered Cover Bookstore here in Denver, Colorado. My name is Adam and I am the director of events. And tonight I am super stoked to have an amazing debut author in conversation with one of the funniest writers on the planet. For those of you who don't know, Tattered Cover is Colorado's largest independent bookstore. We have been doing this initiative to push debuts onto our readers called Debuts to Devour. And tonight's book is one of our picks because we love it so much. Tonight, we're celebrating the release of The Boy with a Bird in His Chest by Lund. She is in conversation with Kristen Arnett. I'm going to read their bios and then just turn it over to them because I, as a fan, am super excited to see both of these writers talk. I'll start with Kristen Arnett, the moderator. She is the author of With Teeth, that came out in 2021, and the New York Times bestselling debut novel, Mostly Dead Things, which came out in 2019. It was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award in Fiction. She's a queer fiction and essay writer. She has been awarded Ninth Letters Literary Award in Fiction and has been a columnist for Literary Hub and is a current columnist for Catapult. She currently lives in Miami and loves beer and her dog and is amazing and funny. And then Emme Lund, who we are celebrating tonight, the release of her book, is an author living and writing in Portland, Oregon. She has an MFA from Mills College. Her work has appeared in Electric Literature, Time, The Rumpus, Paper Darts, and many, many more places. In 2019, she was awarded the Oregon Literary Arts Fellowship in Fiction. This is obviously her debut novel, as I mentioned, The Boy with a Bird in His Chest. Emme and Kristen, please virtually come on into the room so I can hop off and just watch you two amazing writers talk. How are both of you doing?
Great. Thank you, Adam.
I'm great. I'm really happy to be here. I'm looking forward to talking with Em about holding them captive and talking to her about her book for a while. Also, yeah.
And then I should mention anyone out there watching, if you have a question, put it in the YouTube chat and I'll make sure Kristen and Em get to it, but I'll turn it over to you writers. Awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks, great. Adam.
Well, I'm so happy to catch you on the second leg of tour. You have been busy. You've been doing a lot, right? And you were drinking that throat coat earlier.
I am currently drinking throat coat. Yes, I'm a busy girl. This is week 2 of my book tour. So happy to be here. So grateful you're able to do this.
Yeah, I feel lucky to be able to do this with you. I mean, I was lucky enough to be able to read an early copy so that I could I feel lucky that I was able to be in on the early side of it and see it before everybody else got to. And it's such a I don't know, it's a tender, interesting, very it's a book. I was this is a book I haven't read before. So it was a very, I remember sitting, I was sitting outside in Florida where I live and reading it and being this is literally something I have never encountered and it's very special. So thank you for letting me be part of this. And I'm excited that everybody's been engaging with it. From what I've seen, it's everybody is yeah, this is a special book. It's a special perfect thing. So I will, we're gonna have questions from other people. I have a million, so I will try and hone my stuff down so that we can make room for other people to have their questions too. But a thing that I like to do that I feel is just me being a little diabolical is that I think the and I say this because I hate it when people do it to me, so I'm going to do it to you also. But a great way, I think, to start off a talk about talking about a book that you worked on for literally years is to be to ask the person if they'd be willing to give an elevator pitch of their own work. Can you condense it down into a very small, little, beautiful, prettily packaged little gift that you can give to all of your listeners out here? What is the elevator pitch for this beautiful book that you have just let out into the world?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. What a fun question. How many floors we got? Are we going up to the 20th, or is this we got 2 floors and then I'm done?
I'll give you 10 floors. You can have 10 floors to keep this out.
So The Boy with the Bird in His Chest follows Owen Tanner, who is a young boy who has a bird who emerges from behind his ribs when he's an infant. His mother is so worried for him. She's so threatened by this. She thinks he's going to be whisked away by scientists and Child Protective Services and other institutes to be experimented on. And so she hides him away in her house for 10 years. When he's 14, he starts roaming on his own and he gets in some really serious danger. And his mother, because of that, whisks him away to live in Puget Sound, Washington with his cousin Tennessee and his uncle Bob. There, he's allowed to have a bit more of a life. He discovers punk music. He discovers his sexuality and queer community. And he learns to share bits of himself with the world.
I think that's a great elevator pitch. That was good. That was definitely 10 floors worth of elevator pitch. I mean, the premise alone, like I remember reading like that premise that is like such a grabbing premise, right? Because it's like, it's got all the great like kind of coming of age stuff that like is so interesting anyway, right? Like, you know, somebody who feels like very isolated and, you know, is just looking for like a space where they can feel like safe and accepted and find like a community kind of thing. Like, but plus like adding in this kind of like magical realism, like the idea of the fantastic, right? Like the actual literal bird in the chest. So I have to like, I know you've probably been asked this a million times, but for my own, you know, because I've got you here, so I get to ask whatever I want.
Absolutely.
I'd love to hear about like the process, like the thought process that went into this. Was this like a project that started off as like an image? Because that image is very powerful, right? Like the idea of like a literal bird in the chest is like such a powerful image. Or was it something that started off as like a smaller idea that kind of grew? Was it like, how long did this project take? Like if you want to do any kind of explanation of that kind of stuff, I'd be pleased as punch. Because I think it's like very fascinating. I was like, it's such a pun, like quote, like a pun intended, like novel idea. But I was like, it's like fascinating. I was like, oh, this is like such an interesting thing. So I would love to hear like how that was for you, like how it started, like what the little nugget was, and then how it proceeded.
Yeah, so I mean, I always tend to write weird stories. They're all a little absurd and a little strange. I'm not exactly sure how the exact image came to me. I know I was sitting working through this problem of wanting to start. It started as a short story originally, and I was thinking a lot about, you know, queerness. This moment when we're in high school, middle school, we're coming of age, and what it means to feel isolated, what it means to have this feeling of difference that tells you, you know, am I the only one who feels this way, and having no way of finding out, because in order to ask people if they also feel this way, you're then exposing yourself to danger, you're putting yourself in vulnerable situations. So I was thinking a lot about that. I was reading a lot of Amy Bender at the time.
Yeah, there you were.
Who I love.
Yeah.
And I knew I wanted to write a coming of age story. I knew I wanted to focus on these years of high school, early high school to late high school. And I knew that I wanted queerness to be a large part of the project, but I didn't want the pain of queerness or the quote unquote coming out story, or that the notion that like a character has to come to terms with their sexuality or their gender to be the center of the story. I didn't even want it to be an issue. I was like, what? Like, how can we have a queer story that's full, a coming of age story that's full of queer joy, abundance, community, that centers those things? I mean, there's still plenty of pain in this book, obviously, but how do we move away from that notion that it's something to be grappled with, or something that a character has to come to terms with and learn to accept? And so my solution to that was to give him a bigger problem than his queerness, to give him something that was, you know, I say he had bigger fish to fry than the fact that he loves boys. I mean, that it all comes second to the fact that he's got a giant secret, which is he's carrying a bird around in his chest.
Yeah.
And he thinks if he's found out, he's going to be stolen away from his family, his friends, his community, and that the bird Gail might be stolen away from him.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, as a person who, because I also I love thinking about the idea of fiction that is inherently queer, that has queerness like fully saturated by queerness, but not necessarily having to interrogate the ideas of like, okay, now we're gonna like have to deal with the unpacking of the trauma of like what queerness is, or like, right, like a coming out narrative. That is like a really interesting idea, like as a like as a from a craft perspective of being like, okay, like what's a bigger deal for this person to deal with than dealing with coming out? And it's like, we're going to deal with like something else coming out of their chest. Like I have to get this thing off my chest, and it's like literally a bird. That's like, I mean, it's rife with like, as a person who loves to make a joke out of anything, it's like rife with like, right, kind of like this humor. But that's such a smart, fascinating kind of way to think about like what's a way that we can like circumvent this. So that is like incredible. I mean, it is this thing too where it's like I mean, obviously I wanted to ask you about queer stuff because it is like it is such a queer book. And like I was thinking a lot about that as I was like heading into this event with you, like even before today, just like when you'd asked me if I would like do the event, I was like, yeah, let's do it. And then I was like, okay, like what are the things that like, because there were things that like drew me in immediately, right? Like when I was saying like the premise, like the pitch of this book is like, oh wow, that's a grab, like it grabs you. But then there's this way in which this book is like so deeply enriched with queerness, but it's like a way in which it's like it's not necessarily all the time talking about queerness. And those are like my favorite kind of stories, I feel like, where it's like you feel them kind of sitting inside of it. And maybe so much of that is because this is a book that is like, to me, felt like it was dealing so much with like a community, and like that community is shifting, right? Like for this like character, this is a character who like so just deeply wants to have like connection with the people that are around him, and like what that connection looks like. So like I was wondering maybe if you wanted to like talk about like the idea of like community in this book, or like kind of connection between like characters, and how that kind of connects with queerness, like at least in this novel, or what you were thinking when you wrote it.
Yeah, I mean, community, chosen family, connection were all at the center of what I wanted to write about when I was writing this book. I grew up in the 90s and early
Me
2000s.
too, yeah.
And so I mean, I grew up, I mean, a poor white trans woman in the 90s when there was not many role models to look up to. When my family is a very evangelical, conservative Christian household. So I was just not given that opportunity to have chosen family, to find queer folks who felt similarly to the way I did. And it wasn't until high school when, again, it was the early 2000s when I was in high school. I mean, it was 2000 when I was in high school. And I did find a fantastic community of other punk kids, goth kids who were all just different. It was just a lot of us who were just kind of fucked up in our own ways, who ended up finding comfort in hanging out together. But it wasn't explicitly queer. I didn't come out until later in life. And so in a lot of ways, I really wanted to write about what it could have been like to find queer community and chosen family when I was in high school, instead of later in my 20s and into my 30s. I'm so grateful for my chosen family who I have now, who I mean, really keep me alive. And I wanted to write about that. And really, I was like, well, I'm writing about someone who's living in 2014, 2015. It's different now. And again, I didn't want to center or write about that sort of coming of terms moment. And so it made perfect sense that when he gets to Washington, when he is so craving connection and community because he's been literally locked in his house for 10 years, hasn't met another kid his age other than, you know, at a distance, that he would fall in with this circle of punk queer kids who all love the same music he does, who introduce him to music and take him to shows, and sort of are a model of queerness, of living as they want to live. I mean, so many so many of these characters I honestly really do admire in this book, just the way they don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
It's something I've very much had to learn how to do.
Mhm.
But yeah, I was writing into that. I was really leaning into like, what would it have been like to find this in high school, to not have to live into my 20s and 30s before I found other queer and trans people who felt the same way I did about things and who love me for who I am. And yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that so much. I mean, it's like it is this special kind of thing. I think another a surprising thing for myself that I connected with inside of this book that I wasn't expecting was that idea of like kind of like punk DIY scene. Like as a 20 something, I lived in Gainesville, Florida, and it's like there's like a heavy punk scene in Gainesville that that is actually very, very queer. And because it took me a little bit longer to like come out. Like my family is also like yours, like was very evangelical and conservative. And so living away from them and living in Gainesville was like kind of my first opportunities to be around like these like groups of people that were like, yeah, this like completely, not even just like, yeah, because it wasn't a space that was necessarily queer all the time, but it was like, it almost felt like it was like I'm using the word saturated again, but it was like sitting there inside of it. And it was this way of kind of an eye-opening experience of like, oh, this is ways that people can be. Like this is ways that like people can exist with each other and on their own. And that is, it's such a joyful thing inside of this book, I think, is to see these, especially these scenes where they like are enjoying like talking about like music and going to shows and thinking about stuff like that. And I'd love if you wouldn't mind, because I read those and I was like, this is so like it felt just joyful to me. It felt like open and like also deeply relatable. But I'd love for you to talk about that because I was like, this feels so authentic. It felt like I felt like I was really seeing it as it happened. Like as it felt like a special moment. Like I was like, I've been here and I'm experiencing it. I was like, is there like research you put into that? Or is like that just like from personal experience? Or like this, I was like, this feels like I am looking right at it. I'm like walking around in it. And it feels like very, very lived in this authentic kind of way.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad that comes through. I mean, the research I did was just my own experience in high school. I had lived in Portland until I was about 11 years old, and then my parents moved. We moved south to Salem, which is the capital city here in Oregon, and is much more conservative, and much more cut off from progressive ideals in the music scene, of course. And I was just a really sad kid when I was in high school. But the moments when I was happiest were those when I found music, when I could go to shows. I started sneaking out of my parents' house when I was 15 to drive up to Portland with my friends to go see shows. And it was the greatest feeling. And you know, growing up in Salem too, there was a ton of music happening when I lived in Salem. I played in bands. All my friends played in bands, and there were no venues to play in. I mean, we had like one coffee shop that would let us play shows. And other than that, we played in like there was a garage behind our like friend's uncle's house that he let us put shows on in. There was like a point where some people rented out a storage unit and they would throw shows out there and like set up a full bar, and we'd show up at this storage unit in the middle of nowhere on a
Mhm.
Friday night and see a show.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of, you know, just those sort of moments where we didn't have the venues built, the places that would let us play shows, and so we found a way to play them anyways. And I wanted to capture that feeling. There's, you know, of course, the fort in the book, which is a fort that is like old and crumbling outside of Puget Sound, or along the Puget Sound, where they go and watch punk shows. And I had been talking with a friend a few years ago, and they were telling me about some artist they saw who lived, I think, in Olympia or Seattle, who was known for playing really wild shows in weird places. And he played one on an island that was only accessible during low tide. And so they would like they all took boats out to this island and he played a show, and then the tide froze and they had to get back in boats and go back on the mainland. And so I loved that idea. And so I stole it and put it in my book. But yeah, everything was just, that's what we did. And so, you know, I just reached back into the depths of my mind for my research. And, you know, still go to shows. I mean, I haven't been to a show now in 2.5 years, but
Right. Yeah.
still like to go to shows when I can. And still, I mean, here in Portland, we have shows in warehouse spaces from time to time and things. And it's just the best feeling when you're around just all your friends and no one gives a shit. And there's just the best music playing and it's just people thrashing in the middle of the dance floor. It's just, there's nothing like it. And so I thought that Owen would need that in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like really, I mean, you feel it in there. I mean, because you're absolutely right. There's this like, right, like so much of that kind of culture is like, right, like warehouse shows or house shows, right? Like some shitty house that's like in the middle of nowhere, and it's like, whose house is this? But it's like the energy there is like incredible. But I felt like reading the book and these like specific sections, I was like, this energy is like here, like I can feel it, it's like resonating inside of it, and it felt like so lived. So that's like, I'd love to hear that. It's like fascinating. I'd love it also too, because you brought up like, I mean, this is such a book, is like very like Pacific, like Northwest kind of feeling, like, and as a writer who writes like a lot about place and like a lot about Florida, which is its own specific kind of ecosystem, this book has like a ton of that inside of it too, that's like very like, and it's like a very unique kind of voice of place. Like as reading through it, I can be like, okay, I feel like what this feels like in moments too, because this is like, what does it feel like to be housed and unhoused inside of this book at moments too, right? Like what does this feel like what does it feel like to like sleep inside of like a car in this book? Or what does it feel like to like be outside and to be like dealing with like how weather feels, but also like with other people and also alone? I'd love it if you talk a little bit about like what it was like writing place inside of here, because I think it was very special to read.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, so my grandfather had his house is on the Puget Sound, just outside of Olympia, and so I spent my summers going up there for weeks at a time and just spending a lot of time next to the water, you know, going clamming and throwing oyster nets out and, you know, tromping through the woods. And so it just made sense to me. I have really fond memories of that. It was some of my favorite times in the summer. Was just getting to spend time at that house, and there were so many woods around, and it was right, I mean, just on the beach. You just like walk through the woods, and there was the sound, and it was so fantastic. And then my wife is from Montana, and so we go back, you know, more so before the pandemic, but we try to go back a few times a year. And for me, for some reason, those places feel connected. I mean, I know Montana is not Pacific Northwest, but it feels similar. And they're from Missoula, which is right in the middle of the Rockies. And so I just really, I mean, I wanted to capture what it felt like to be in those mountains, to feel the air, to the dirt in Montana feels a very specific way. And then to be at the Puget Sound, which is just so lush and green. And we have similar weather and foliage down here in Portland. So I drove to the Puget Sound a few times, and would take like my plant ID book and like walk around next to the water and see what kind of plants I saw and what kind of animals. And I really, it's always important to me to anchor readers in the space before moving on to scenes. I often, that's one of the first things I want to do is set up where we are, what it feels like, what it smells like, what the tree bark feels like against your skin, what sounds you hear. Those are all so important to me. And so I spend a lot of time just taking notes. And of course I wanted to write about that space because I had spent so much time up there. But it had been 20 years by the time I was writing these scenes. So I did have to go up there a few times. And it's so beautiful. If anyone has the chance to go to Puget Sound, particularly Olympia, it's a little less crowded than further north when you get up into like Seattle, Tacoma area. Just some really, really beautiful wildlife. I mean, I've seen orcas from my grandfather had binoculars, and we'd watch orcas swim into the sound, or bald eagles, or otters, and just a really lovely place. I was fortunate enough to get to visit frequently.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. Because this is like a lot of like, right, like scene setting, like here it is, like the kind of like deep, like this, the detail work where it's like, it doesn't need to be like a profusion of details, but just like those ones, the small ones that kind of set where it's like, just like, right, like you even saying like tree bark or something like that. There's like those things, right? There it's like the texture of something, or the very specific scent of something in like sunlight, or like in dampness. Like right after a rain, or like in shadow or something. Like there's like like the way that those things resonate. I would imagine like even though you haven't been there for a while, like going back, like probably you were like, oh right, like this kind of like sense memory, like of like, oh right, I remember this kind of way of like moving through space. I mean, I think it's very apparent in the book. And there's like a lot about like water in the book that's very interesting, like thematically. Like I won't try and like tell people information if they haven't like read the book yet, but I'd love if you could a little bit about like kind of like the significance of like water inside of the book. I mean, as much as you feel like you would like to say, like I don't want to give anything away.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been drawn to water. I mean, I of course grew up going to the Puget Sound, and then living in the Pacific Northwest as a kid. We went to a lot of lakes and rivers, and did shit like fishing and camping, and all the stuff you do when you live here, and you don't got a lot of money. And so I just always loved standing next to the water and feeling that. When I was real young and we'd go camping, I would often wake up before anyone else, and I would walk down to the water by myself, which probably wasn't great for like a 7-year-old to do, but it's what I would do. And there was something always special about it for me. Of course, Owen is born a Pisces, so he's very much drawn to water, but he's also born in the first few pages on the day of like the Great Flood in Montana. And so I just, as a writer, was always curious as to what the origin of my attraction to water was. It felt innate, it felt deep down inside, and so I felt like I needed to explain it for some reason in regards to Owen, and so I made him born during the greatest flood in Montana history, and be a Pisces.
That's very queer of you.
Yeah, I know. There is a lot of astrology in this book.
Yeah, I love
that. A lot of witchiness, a lot of tarot, because they're queer teenagers, and you can't get away from it. But yeah, I was like, water's important. It's important to me. It's also important to Owen. I'll make it make sense. And then actually, when I sent my first draft to my editor, Melanie at Atria, she was like, I love this. I think there could be more water stuff threaded through. And I was like, yes, you got it. Absolutely. Music to my ears, humming up, and went back and absolutely added even more water references.
Oh, you're like, oh, no problem.
Yes.
No problem.
Locked and loaded. I think I had scenes I had cut out because I was like, all right, Em, we get it. Water, kind of really beating the reader over the head with it.
Oh God.
She asked me to bring him back in, so I was like, yes. That's how I knew the book had found its rightful home.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree though, because it is one of those things where it's like, when you're writing, I mean, I don't know what your process is like. Okay, this is a good question. Like, this wasn't a question I was going to ask, but now I'm going to ask it because we've naturally migrated to it. But I think like a question of process, like especially when it comes to stuff like, right, like when you find like things like threading themselves inside of the narrative, maybe because maybe you expected them to be there, maybe you didn't expect them to be there, but they're finding their way and they're repeating themselves and kind of echoing through the work. Like, when you think about how you're writing this, like, are you a person that like plots things out? Do you outline? Like, was this like, did you like sit down and just be like, okay, because you said this, like, because the germ of this was like the idea of a short story and then kind of turn into something else? Or is this like something where you just were like, I'm gonna explore this and see what happens with it? Like, what was the process of that like?
Yeah, I don't plot anything out, much to my chagrin. I
Oh, I
just
don't either.
love,
I do
I
not
just
either. Please do not apologize.
wade through the work and wait for it to find its footing. Yeah, I mean, I just, and as far as like, you know, themes or things like that, I think it's important to let those come naturally, to not be forced. Of course, I always go back later and we'll pull threads through so that it's consistent in the story. But I think, you know, our subconscious, our writing self sort of is focused on these images that keep coming up for a reason. And so I like to lean into those when they do come up. And then yeah, you got to finesse it later. But
Yeah.
no, I'm a slow plotter. I just sort of make my way through the story. This book took me about 7 years, and I overwrite just a shit ton. I just write so much, and I just, you know, oh, what are these two characters doing today? And then it's like, you know,
Yeah.
15 pages that I'll never use. But you know, I feel like that's how I feel like writing is discovery. The way that I do it anyways, I write to learn the story. And so I just try to write through a first draft and figure out what the story is, and then I can go through and make it right. But yeah, I can't plot anything out. I've tried. I've been like, all right, here we go. I've got an idea for a book. I'm gonna sit down, and just every time it's just derailed. It either stalls or just becomes something entirely different. And I like to be able to just follow my writing intuition, follow just wherever the story wants to go, and not put it in a box, I guess, or
Yeah.
not put limits on it, and not try to think like, oh, I need to get to this place. I like to just sort of write and find my way through place. I sometimes wish I was a plotter. Like, oh, how cool would it be to be like, I figured out the book. I'm gonna spend 8 months writing it.
Yeah.
You know, but
Yeah.
it's not me. It's just every morning I get up and just, oh, what the hell am I doing today? I don't know. And I sit down and write stuff, and yeah, keep some of it and throw the rest away.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's deeply relatable. I relate to that a lot. Because I think, yeah, because I mean, I think there's like, right, just as like there's a million different kinds of ways to like do anything, there's a million different kinds of ways to write and kind of come up with a story. But yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. I like, because I think the way that you're talking about is a way that also we get to, as writers, we get to enjoy the surprise of kind of seeing what's going to happen, and I love that. I know we have questions from other people, but I'm going to ask my own first before we get into them. Because I haven't even asked about Gail yet, and I was like, I can't not ask about Gail. Because I was thinking, I literally was today, like this morning, I was sitting down, I was like answering emails and doing stuff like the kind of like, oh, I have to answer this email right now, but like also at the same time kind of like thinking about other stuff because I'm like anticipating us talking. And I was thinking, because I've been thinking about Gail, like the bird, and I was like, I love this idea. And you can answer this any way you like, and however you would like to talk about like Gail as a concept, because I love the literal idea of like just the bird existing inside of the chest as just as the bird. But from a craft perspective, I was like, you have a narrator here, but I was like, actually, you kind of have like two. I was like, this is like dual narrators. I was like, it's actually like another narrator from inside the body. And I was like, that is like so cool. And so I don't know. So you don't have to answer necessarily from a craft perspective, but like when you were thinking about, because this is a person who's never alone, right? Like they always have this other with them, that speaks to them and that cares for them, but that also they have like, they're separate from each other, but like live together. And I was like, there's lots of ways to like explore this and think about it, but like from a craft perspective, I was like, oh shit, that is like very cool to think about, because it's like it is this idea of like, right, I'm a narrator, but I'm like never alone, right? It's like us as the writer, like we're like on mission and we're kind of like coming into it. Anyway, so I'd love if you talk a little bit just about like your thoughts with Gail, because I think that that is like, I mean, just as a concept is so cool. But like, yeah, whatever like nuggets you'd like to give us of that, because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I really learned that it was a balancing act with this book because, I mean, there's just so, I mean, instantly when I was working on this and the bird emerged and I was like, okay, here's this character, a bird lives in his ribs.
Mhm.
My next question was a series of like, what dangers does he face? What's that like? And then, you know, do they always get along? What's she like? And it became this balancing act of when to bring her into scenes and when to leave her out, because there are moments when she's quiet, but she is always there. Um, and there were some times writing it when, especially if I was working on a scene between Owen and like three other characters, where I would have to go back and ask myself like, what exactly is Gail doing here?
Yeah.
Because I was so focused on the three characters communicating and talking and what they were doing that I forgot that there was also a bird in his chest.
Yeah.
Since I full disclosure, don't have a bird in my choice. In my chest. It's not own voices in that regard in writing outside of my lived experience.
Yeah.
And so I had to, you know, I'd be like, what's she doing here? I haven't talked about her in 2 pages.
Hmm.
Does she move? Does Owen notice that she's not saying anything or moving?
Right.
And then I also had to like pull it back at times because she's really chatty in the book. She loves talking. She
Uh-huh.
loves telling jokes. She like at moments will just like gab and gab and gab and gab and gab because she's not really paying attention to what Owen's paying attention to. And so
Uh-huh.
there's points where he's like, you've got to stop talking to me. I'm trying to focus, and you're just like going on a rant about like how you think humans are or whatever you're
Yeah.
really doing. And there were times, there were a lot more of those moments in the book, and I was like, she's just quiet here. She could just be quiet for a moment.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was like the way I sort of conceptualized in my head is the way my mind tends to race, and I do have like an inner monologue a lot of the time that just sometimes just won't keep quiet.
Yeah.
And so the way I thought about it was like, okay, well, what if I could ask my inner monologue to be quiet? What
Yeah.
if I could ask my brain to stop talking for a second so I could focus on something? And then also, what if that inner monologue could also get like frustrated with me and throw a temper tantrum and not talk to me for 6 months?
Yeah.
And like, what would that feel like? But yeah, it was really an odd problem that I gave myself.
Yeah. But a cool
Like,
one though.
the
Yeah.
only maybe the only writer who's given herself the problem of like, what do I do with this second character that is literally present at every turn in this book? Yeah, but it was a learning curve, but I got through it.
Yeah. I think it works. I love the idea of like, because I think I would have had to do the same thing, right? Like the idea of like there's an unseen but still presence there. Like, okay, if I'm going through a scene where there's other people, like how does that presence make or not make itself known? And having to go through and keep that like at like the forefront of your mind as you're like going through and doing edits, like how does like, because there's like space, right, where it's like we think about that as writers all the time, I think, where it's like the said and the unsaid, like, right, like what is unsaid in a moment is like maybe it's just maybe more important than what people do say. So to like have like this unseen, like very specific, very important character, like what does the unsaid mean in that moment, you know? Like that's, I could like literally talk to you about this like for like another hour. So I know we have questions from people, so I will flip on over into the questions. So I'm going to ask the first one that we have popped up, which is from Mary. And the question is, what was the most difficult part to figure out about this novel?
I think, well, the last thing to sort of click into place, which maybe is the most difficult, or the thing I struggled with the most was the pacing of the book.
Mhm.
Um, I because I'm a slow sort of wade through the story type of writer, it meant that I had a lot of scenes to go through and pull um, pull from, and then also cut. And so that was the thing that, I mean, my agent and I worked on for 2 drafts, trying to make it so that there was some sort of propulsion to the story that kept the reader engaged and kept the reader reading, while also I wanted to capture a sort of quieter coming of age novel that wasn't so much like, here's a character who's going on an adventure who is, you know, I mean, he is in immediate danger, but there's not like, you know, someone he's running from, in that there's someone right behind him, or he's not constantly on the run. And so figuring out how to propel the reader through the story. And then when I met with my editor, we had an editorial meeting early on, and that was something that she wanted to see too, was just more pacing, more a bit more conflict. And she said something just so smart in our first meeting, where she was like, you know, Em, when I read your book, it's just so clear to me that the shape of it is the ocean, that your book is the ocean, we have these moments where there's waves of anxiety and danger and conflict that wash over Owen, and then he gets covered in that, he's drenched in that sort of conflict and anxiety, and the wave ebbs. And so then he's able to sort of start to get comfortable again, and then another wave crashes. And so it was her guidance that really helped me see, like, oh, okay, like completely just one of those things where it's like 4 sentences, but it blew up my whole whole book, and helped me understand it in a way that could keep a reader engaged with the work, and interested in continuing to turn the page.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I am a huge fan. I'm thinking about like shapes of like how especially how novels look. So that is like so cool, because it is like a thing, right? Where it's like it helps you, because I do think pacing can be a thing, right? Where we're writing for ourselves, but we're also like, right, there's the invisible audience of like who is like our reader, you know, and our reader is our own reader, you know. It's like I remember like Chip Delaney, like Samuel Delaney told me, like I was in a workshop with him and he described it one time. He's like, what's like the red line of death? And that's like the line where somebody like flips the book over, like they stopped reading for a moment and turned it over. What's that thing like that makes it so they never pick it back up again? And he called it the red line of death. And so it's like you're trying to like keep a momentum going, that so that they never reach, like maybe they reach a place where they have to close the book for a night, but never so that they don't pick the book back up again, right? And so like, but I think pacing is difficult, especially if we're like engaged in a story, like trying not to be like, right, like if you're not like, I'm not trying to lob conflict necessarily at a character from minute to minute. Like I'm also, and this book I think is doing it, is interested in the smaller moments, like, right, like moments of like tenderness and community and like vulnerability, and what vulnerability can look like, and how to hold a secret, and how maybe to reveal that in small tender ways. And those take like quiet, and I think that there's like beautiful breaths of that like throughout this book, that don't make me want to stop reading. I don't think would make a reader other than me want to stop reading. Again, I'm going on a tangent. You have another?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, those quiet moments can be propulsive too.
Yeah.
You know, and that's something that I try to engage with in my writing, is like capturing moments that feel quiet, or where nothing is happening, but it's still weirdly engaging. And like there's something that's sort of pulsing forward. I think about this scene a lot where, you know, Owen is struggling and he goes out into the woods, and the woods are quiet, and this neighbor who's across the way is sitting on his horse, his neighbor Clyde, and he's like,
yeah,
he points, and there's a doe standing in the woods just a few feet away from him, and it's just him watching this deer in the woods. But I mean, it's one of my favorite scenes in the book, and I do feel like there's a bit of propulsion there, that like, even though nothing's happening, he's not running from anyone. He's not even, I mean, he's upset, but he's not even like reeling from this. He's just being quiet in this space. But it's still engaging, and it's still when don't we, like, I really, everyone should stop and have these moments where it's quiet and we just notice what's around us, and we pay attention to these really small details, the flick of a tail on a doe in the woods. And maybe I'm bonkers for thinking this, but I think that those moments are still incredibly engaging and
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree. And I think that there's such a beautiful movement of them throughout this book. Like these very small moments of like breath, or they feel like they're doing like just as much, if not more, than like the moments of right, like of like active, like physical things that are happening. Okay, you have another question. This is from Anna. I heard on a podcast you were a slow writer, which you've been talking about. What does a day of writing look like for you?
I'm still figuring that out after
Me too.
20 years of writing. Um, lately I have found this really great group that just really is just my favorite thing. And I've been like, because of the pandemic, my brain is just not working the way it used to. So I've had a hard time really focusing on writing over the last couple years. But my new trick is I get up. These last 2 weeks have been horrid because of publicity for the book. But I don't look at social media before noon. I don't open my phone. I will answer emails on my computer because I'm engaging with a lot of folks on the East Coast and I want to be respectful of their time. But
Right.
I do not look at Twitter. I do not look at Instagram. I make coffee and I don't really, like, my brain isn't awake in the morning. My wife gets up at 8:30, and so I get up with them to go to work. But I will just sit on the couch for an hour and read and sit with my dogs and be really, really quiet. And then around like 10:30 or 11, my brain starts to wake up a bit and I'll go into my office and I'll write for usually a couple hours straight. Um, and my actual writing time looks very different. It's usually me writing for 20 minutes and then reading poetry or a short story and then going back and writing for another half an hour and kind of meandering through edits and doing what I got to do depending on if I have deadlines or not. And then after lunch, I feel like I'm much more like, my brain is just turned on. It's like fully activated. It's warmed up. And I'll check social media. I'll do what I want to, engage with what I want to engage with on social media. And then I'll write until 4:30 or so when I usually try to take my dogs for a walk.
Yeah.
And that's it. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of like, I was bartending until a week and a half ago, which meant that I wrote in the mornings until about 3, and then I went and I would bartend nights. So they were very, very full days. But yeah, just learning recently how to work with my new brain that just really has not been happy with pandemic.
Yeah.
And just learning how to be on my own timeline. I think for a long time I was like, all writers I know say they love to write first thing in the morning, so I should be that kind of
Yeah.
person. And really, I'm more engaged at night. I'll often, even after dinner, sometimes I'll sit back into my studio and get some work done because that's when my brain wants to work.
Yeah.
And so I should just listen to it and
Yeah.
give it what it needs and get work done when I can.
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if we actually listened to what our brains wanted from us instead of us trying to like put some kind of very specific restrictions on ourselves? But you brought up a good point because I have been trying, bless you, because I've been really trying to do what you've been saying, which is that to try and like when I first get up is to engage with writing of any kind. And I've been trying to do because you get a lot of like there's like arcs or people send books or things like that, but to engage with work on like a level with like purely like excitement of language, right? Like I love working on fiction and like what you're saying was like and reading poetry because it's this level it gets me excited about like the expanse and breadth and stretchiness of like what like a turn of phrase can do, and that gets me excited. And I would love if before I have to give you back. Um, I'm like trying to keep you for a little while. But like before I let you go, if you would talk a little bit about what you were reading while you were working on the book, like things that like you felt like maybe were influential towards working on it, and what you're reading now and are excited about.
Yeah, so when I was working on this book, it's sort of its mother book or its home book was Tom Spanbauer's Now is the Hour, which is a fantastic queer coming of age story about a queer kid in the 70s who just really wants to get the fuck out of Idaho. And it's about him, I mean, discovering his queerness and discovering music and really falling in love. And it just was one of those books that I read and was just so astounded by the way that it centered queer joy and abundance. And I just, every time I felt like I was getting lost at sea with this book, I'd be like, back to Span Power, because he showed me how to do it. And I'm so excited. A week ago, a friend reached out and was like, hey, I have a way to get Tom a copy of the book if you want. He's here in Portland, and I had written not me, a book reviewer for the Oregonian, a paper here, had written a review of the book and had compared it to Now is the Hour without me prompting or anything, which is
Wow.
one of those great
Yeah.
connection moments. And yeah, so I clipped out that review and was able to leave him a copy of a book at a bar here in Portland that
That's so
his partner is
special.
going to
I
pick
love
up.
that.
But yeah, that was a huge influence. I read a lot of Clarice Lispector, who is nothing like what I write, but I feel like she handles like metaphor and allegory. And I mean, talk about someone who can write pacing and conflict without like a single speck of any sort of conflict in her stories. Yeah, she's someone I read a lot of for poetry. I was reading a lot of Banu Kapil.
Oh, I love Banu. Oh
So
my
good.
God. Yes.
But yeah, the way she writes about like I don't know, humanity and like gender and just our like animalistic nature, all of these things that I was really interested in the book. Um, yeah, she was a big poet for me while I was writing this book. I could keep going. Right now I'm reading the new Elena Ferrante book, The Lying Life of Adults, which came out here in the States last year. It's sort of, I just love, it's like reading a soap opera to me. I love her book so much. And I've been reading a ton for this book, and then a ton of arcs and galleys for blurbs and things like that. And so
Yeah,
I just
I
wanted
bet you are.
to take a quick little break and read something that's just really, I don't know. I just love her writing so much. And it's one of those things that I can't even pinpoint. I'm like, I don't know. She's writing about like a teenager in Italy
Yeah.
and I can't put it down.
I love that though, because I feel like there's like certain writers where it's like it feels like we have an understanding that when we pick up their fiction, it's going to be like slipping into a warm bath. And I mean that in the best way possible. Like not that I mean that it would like lull you into a sense of complacency or lull you into like not listening to what it's doing, but almost like it makes it so it's like it's going to ease you into it in this like very welcoming kind of way so that you feel that you could maybe even engage with the language in this kind of way, or maybe you couldn't on another book that maybe you like, but there's not an ease in, I don't know what the right word is. Like I almost said like friendliness, but it's not necessarily friendliness. It's this kind of like an opening where it's like you can kind of like, okay, like I know when I open this kind of book, I'm going to, or this writer. I feel that way a lot about Karen Russell. Like when it's like I know when I open her work, it's going to like challenge me, but in a way that's like wanting to like take me along. And like every time I like look at it, it's like expanding my puny little walnut brain.
Yeah, some books just feel sort of like home, or sort of, I mean, like Karen Russell is one of those writers too. Or your work, Kristen, in fact, where I read it and I'm like, I could not have written this because I'm not you, but it feels like a book I could have written
Oh,
in this
I love
way.
that. I love
Which is
that.
just like, and also reversely, like, this is smarter than anything I could have come up with. That sort of feeling where you're like, oh, why didn't I think of that? And also, like, I never would have thought of that. And it just feels, like home.
Yeah, it's like this kind of fun way of like, it's like kind of almost a conversation. And it doesn't, even though it's kind of like technically one-sided, it's like I know I'm having this conversation where I'm reading someone's work and I'm like, but then it makes me go back to my own work and like think about it in new and like exciting ways, or maybe just in a small, just a small shift of a kind of way. But it's like, especially, I don't know. This has been like, this is so fun. I'm having like a really nice time.
I mean, I think too, real fast, Adam, before I just want to say that I think I became a writer because writing is conversation. I grew up loving books and loving reading books. And so for me, I wanted to talk back. And so I think that is what writing is for me and for a lot of us, I think. And that's what we're doing when we're reading books and then sitting down and writing our own work is responding to what we've read, responding to what's being said and replying. Yeah, it's a conversation.
Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you both so much for doing this for Tattered Cover. I mean, congratulations, Em, on your book, and Kristen, thanks for coming on. It was such a treat. I let you go on forever. Usually, I'm like typing in the chat. I'm coming in right now. Where can we, what's the best way to connect with you on the internet? Are you tweeters? Are you Instagrammers? Do you not have social media? Where should we connect with both of you?
I'm on both Twitter and Instagram. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's my first name, Emme, underscore last name, Lund, just M_Lund on Twitter. And then on Instagram, I am underscore M Lund. So, yep, that's me. Come follow me and watch me post about gay shit and my dogs and writing.
Oh, that sounds like what I post too. I'm the same. I'm on Twitter too much. Need to be on Twitter less, I think but I'm at Kristen_Arnett on Twitter, and on Instagram I am at Kristen_Arnett because there is the other Kristen Arnett who does green beauty makeup, and she has the other Kristen Arnett, but she's not great. Other Kristen Arnett also lives in Portland. She's great. Yeah, I'm on those places, but I should be on them like way less. If you see me on there, it probably means I need to be doing what Em does, and I need to be taking up a reading break.
Oh, I'm still on there too much, even with looking at 3 hours every morning. Yeah,
the doom scrolling. You can find Tattered Cover at tattercover.com. We have social media, but the website's where you can get Em's book and Kristen's books. So go there. Thank you both so much. Thank you to everyone on the YouTube universe out there who have watched and asked questions. You can watch us whenever you want. It'll be on the internet forever, basically. So everyone have a great night.
Night. Thank you, Em.
Thank you, Kristen. Thanks, Adam.